Hi, I'm Brian Russell, and today I want to talk about living a life that demands explanation. A life in which we live as the person that God created us to be. And I want to suggest that there's three key themes that when we read the Bible carefully and that we're following Jesus, that three themes are going to emerge in our lives, and we have to work on getting these three themes to intersect. What are those three themes? Mission, community, and holiness. God wants us to live as his missional people, a missional community that reflects God's character, God's ethos to, for, and in the rest of the world. And so when we want to think about our lives, we want to think about three key questions. Who is my mission? Who is my community? And what kind of person do I need to become to live out this mission? So let's look at this. We can look at all of these separately. We're going to start with, we'll have mission, community, and holiness. Now, most people aren't going to argue that these three things are important, but most of the time we focus on them separately. So we talk about what's my mission or who is my mission. And that's a key question again, because God calls us to be his ambassadors to the rest of the world. And so there is a mission, and it's God's mission. And the Bible wants to help us to answer the question, how do I fit into God's mission and God's plan for the whole world? So mission is important. Community is also important, because every single person that you're ever going to meet is looking for a place where they can be loved and a place where they can use all the gifts, all the talents, the things that they're most passionate about, bring those to the table and live in community that way. And so a question, who is my community? Who can I do that with? But notice, you want to connect these things, because you can be on a mission, and you can even be on God's mission. But if you're on God's mission, and God's mission assumes that there's community and you're detached, you're not really on God's mission anymore. And in the same way, you can have a community, because there's all kinds of communities around the world and different ways of experiencing community. But if your community isn't connected to God's mission, it's not the missional community that God wants it to be. And then the last piece that goes with this is the idea of holiness or character. It's that ethos that we live out when we fully align ourselves, our love for God and our love for neighbor connects, and the way that we live our lives, both individually, corporately with our community, and in our witness to the world. It's when our lives then reflect and embody the values of God's kingdom. That's what holiness really is. And so a quick snapshot, if we want to live a life that demands explanation, in other words, if we want to live the kind of life when somebody speaks with us, spends time with us, sees us, and they ask themselves, what is it about that person? That's a life that demands explanation. And the key thing is, what's the answer to that question? The answer to the question of a life that demands explanation, when we focus on these three themes, is going to be this. The only answer to that question is going to be that person's been transformed by the grace of God through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. That's what a life that demands explanation looks like. And again, there's a sweet spot here. And that's going to be right here. It's right at the intersection of mission, community, and holiness. When we live in here, we have holiness that's not just separated from everything, but it's a holiness that empowers us to love our neighbor in community and embody who God is when we're on God's mission. So this is a way to draw it. You know, as we grow in grace, as we continue to follow Jesus, as we continue to read the scriptures and ask God to astonish us and continue to transform us, these circles are going to change. Instead of looking like this, where we have a small sweet spot, as God continues to work in our lives and we grow and we continue to grow in that ability to have a life that demands explanation, as we become that person that God created us to be, our circles are going to get closer and closer together. And so that suddenly now our sweet spot isn't just a tiny aspect of our lives, but our sweet spot increasingly becomes that defining center in the biggest part of our lives. That's a life that demands explanation. Are you living as the person that God created you to be today? What if following Jesus Christ were the way to become that person? I invite you to open up the scriptures today and ask God, astonish me, shape me, and unleash me into the world to be your hands, your feet, your mouthpiece. I'm Brian Russell, and I look forward to seeing you next time.